Hi, I'm Kristen Amdahl. This is part 4 in the video series, How to Make Knitted Ornaments. I started the series because I had an urge to do a handmade holiday Christmas tree this year. So I'm taking the motifs from my book, Knitting Outside the Swatch, and creating standalone ornaments from the motifs. In today's video, I'm going to show you how to use this motif to create a knitted ornament. And then at the end of the video, I'm going to show you another component of the book, which is how to join the motifs as you go without sewing. Let's get started. I'm using a size 8 set of knitting needles. These are circulars. You could also use straights for this project. And I'm using some worsted weight yarn. You can use any type of yarn and any type of needles you like. The only thing is, I would say to use an appropriately sized knitting needle for your yarn. This is worsted weight, so a size 8 works perfectly for that. We're going to start by casting on 9 stitches. I'm going to use the long tail cast on. So we start with a slip knot, which is wrapping the yarn around your fingers and pulling a loop of the tail through the loop around your fingers and pull the tail to tighten it. You want to tighten it up onto your knitting needle. And then we're going to do the cast on as follows. You're going to hold the tail yarn in your thumb and the working yarn in your fingers like this, and make a loop around your thumb. Insert the knitting needle into the loop on your thumb and pull the loop of the working yarn through that loop and place it on your needle. We now have the slip stitch counts as our first stitch, and then that is now our second stitch. So we'll do that again. I'll do it really slowly so you can see what I'm doing. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. Okay, row 1 is as follows. We're going to slip, slip, knit, knit 6, and then knit into the front and back of the same stitch. So we start with a slip, slip, knit, which is a decrease. It means you're going to insert your right hand needle into the first and second stitch and slide them over to the right hand needle, which is slipping each of them. Then with your left hand needle, insert it into both stitches, yarn over, whoops, make sure you're using your working yarn, not your tail yarn, yarn over, pull a loop through both of those stitches and off the needle, and that is a slip, slip, knit. You're slipping each stitch individually, then knitting them together. It's a 1 stitch decrease. We had 2 stitches and now we have 1. The next component is to knit 6. So we're going to knit 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And then the last component of row 1 is to knit into the front and back of the last stitch. So we're going to insert our needle into the front of the stitch, yarn over, pull up a stitch on your right hand needle, but before dropping that stitch on the left hand needle, we're now going to work into the back side of that same stitch, yarn over, pull up a loop, and now we have 2 stitches where we once had 1 stitch. So we have a 1 stitch decrease at the beginning of the row and a 1 stitch increase at the end of the row. We've maintained our 9 stitches, but now we're making our work go to the side, and that'll be more apparent as we move along. So row 2 is to just knit across. So we'll knit across all 9 stitches. Very simple, just knit 9. Okay, now the pattern calls to repeat rows 1 and 2 3 more times. So rows 3 through 9 are going to be repeating rows 1 and 2 3 more times, and then row 1 once more. I'm going to show you that row one more time. So we're going to slip, slip, knit, which is slip 1, slip 2, insert your left hand needle from the front, yarn over, pull up a loop, and slide both of those stitches off. We have our decrease done. Then we're going to knit 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and now we'll do our knit into the front and back loop again. We're going to knit into the front and the back of the same stitch before sliding it off of our left-hand needle. So we now have an increase. See how the work is starting to slide that way? Okay, so now we're just going to follow that established pattern through row 9, and at that point I will show you what to do next. I've worked through row 9, and now I'm going to show you how to do the really pretty flower petals that we do at the corner of each of the parallelograms of this star. Parallelogram, just so you know, is a math term, but it means that it's a square that goes on an angle like that. Anyway, we're going to cast on 3 stitches using the knitted cast on technique, and that means we're going to insert our needle as if we're going to knit a stitch, but we're going to knit it and place it on the left hand needle. So kind of like an increase, right? So that's a knit cast on 1, knit cast on 2, and knit cast on 3. If you're familiar with cable cast on, this is very similar, but it is not nearly as rigid as cable cast on. I feel like the knitted cast on is a little stretchier. Okay, so now we're going to bind off 3 stitches, and we have to knit 2 to bind off 1. So we knit 2, slip our first stitch up and off the needle over the second stitch, and we'll knit another one in order to bind off another one, and we'll knit another one in order to bind off another one. So now we're going to insert or replace that stitch back onto the left hand needle and then knit cast on 3 more stitches. So we're going to knit 1, cast on, knit 2, cast on, and knit 3, cast on. And we're now going to bind off those 3 stitches. So we're going to knit 2 to bind off 1. Whoops. I lost it, so I'll have to knit it again. So knit 2 to bind off 1. Knit 1 to bind off the second. Knit 1 to bind off the third. Okay, so now we'll place that stitch back on our left hand needle again, and we're going to knit cast on 3 more times. So we're going to knit 1 to cast on, knit 2 to cast on, and knit 3 to cast on. Then we're going to bind off those 3 stitches. And now we're going to bind off all of the remaining stitches on this row. Okay, and this is what it will look like. My flower petals aren't as dramatic right now as they are in the blocked one, but that's just because it needs to be blocked out and pinned. It's pretty close though. So here's our first component of the flower. I'm going to show it to you on the flower again so you can see what we just did. What we did was make our first component like that. So now to make our second one, we're going to pick up and knit along this side and work it off of this one. So again, there will be no sewing whatsoever. So we've got our first stitch already, and what we're going to do is now pick up and knit 8 more stitches along the side edge here. So we're going to pick up, so we insert your needle into the side of the first row, yarn over and pull up a loop. And you're just going to do that evenly across. It's pretty easy to do when there's a small section of working in. If you were working in a larger section, I would suggest putting pins at certain even spacings so that you make sure to evenly space your stitches out. So we picked up and knit 8 stitches for a total of 9. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or 9. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Oh, I'm missing one. It looks like I've got a gap right there anyway, so we'll pull that out. So we've got 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. All right, and now we're going to turn our work, and we're going to work rows 1 through 9 exactly the same way as we did for the first one. So that starts with a slip, slip, knit, and then knit 6, and knit into the front and back of the last stitch. We're going to turn our work, and we'll just plainly knit across for row 2. All right, and you know exactly what to do now. We're going to do rows 3 through 9, and then we'll check back in together. Here we go. Rows 2 through 9, or 1 through 9, are now complete for our second petal of the flower, and we're about to do the 3-petal edge. And I'm going to show you that one more time. We're going to knit cast on 3 stitches. Then bind off those 3 stitches. Move that stitch, bind it off, then move that stitch back to the left hand needle, and we're going to do that 2 more times. So we'll knit cast on 3, and bind off those 3. I think this would make a great edging on all sorts of things. A scarf, a shawl, a skirt, an afghan. Really is a beautiful, simple and beautiful edge. It's kind of like picots, but joining 3 picots together to create flower petals. And we'll do that a 3rd time. And now we'll continue to bind off the rest of the row. Okay, second petal is done, or second whole section of the flower is done. So now you're going to repeat that 6 more times. We're going to pick up and knit along here and work our next petal. Then when we bind that one off, we'll pick up and knit along its edge and work the next petal. So what you want to do is do this whole piece 6 more times, and then we'll check back in and I'll show you how to join it off. And then I'll show you at the very end how to join this flower to another flower. All 8 sections are done now, and all we need to do is bind off the last stitch, and you want to make, and you want to make sure that your tail is long enough for sewing up the very small seam that remains. Well, may as well do this one too. The starting tail, we're going to weave in that end on the back side. The back side will be the opposite side of where we picked up and knit into the side of the sections. You see how when you do that you actually create this ridge, so I think that that should be the back side, but if you like that line, then you know that could be your front as well. Okay, so we'll turn it back over now. thread our tapestry needle, and we're just going to sew up this edge. If you really wanted to avoid sewing all together, you could pick up and knit into the cast on and bind off edge, approximately 8 stitches, and what you would do is use a 3 needle bind off technique. I mean, it's certainly possible. This is such a small little area that I don't mind sewing this up. Okay, then because I'm actually making an ornament out of this, what I'll end up doing now is cutting an extra piece of string to create the hook for hanging it onto a limb of the Christmas tree. And then in the next section, I'll show you how, if you were going to make a fabric of motifs, whether for the edge of a shawl or an all-over motif shawl, I'll show you how you join these as you go without having to sew them to each other. That part's really cool. I think that's my favorite part of this book in general, is how I show you how to do that with all of the motifs. Okay, so there's our front side of our flower. Now this one hasn't been blocked yet, so you can see what a difference in size it becomes. And this one I've already tied a little string for hanging it on the tree. Cut another one here. I'm just going to tie it through one of the picots. I mean, I'm not really worried about size or anything about this one. It's just going to sit inside the branches on the tree. There we have it. We've got 2 more ornaments for the Christmas tree. In the next section, I'll show you how to join them to each other. One of the best, simplest, and easiest ways I've found to join knitting to knitting is to pick up and knit a stitch into the piece you want to join to, and then knit that stitch together with the live stitch that you're working with. And let me show you what I mean by that. So I'm in the middle of the second picot of our 3 flower petal here. And so I have the knit cast on 3, bind off 3, knit cast on 3. Now before I bind off those 3, I'm going to pick up and knit a stitch into the flower petal or wherever I want to join this piece to. So we're going to pick up, insert our needle, I'll do that again, insert our needle into the spot that we want to join to, yarn over our needle and pull up a loop. So we've picked up and knit 1 stitch there. Turn our work back over and we're going to knit it together with the closest live stitch on our knitting needles. And that's how you join knitting without sewing. Isn't that great? So I'm just going to continue now with our established pattern, which was to bind off those 3 stitches and place them back on the other needle. And after I finish this little section here, you'll see what I mean. We'll bind off these 3 now, because we want to finish that 3-petal picot edge. And then I'll lay the work down so you can see, well, I'll finish this row, I guess, so it can lay down properly. And then you can see how beautifully and seamlessly you can join knitting while you're knitting without having to sew at the end. Isn't that fantastic? Imagine doing a whole shawl out of really lacy flowers like this. I think it'd be so pretty. Or making an edging to a shawl just by joining these. It would be such a pretty fabric. And if you end up doing it, please send me pictures because I would love to see that. So there we go. That's how they look when they're joined. Pretty cool.